The oysters smelled fine. I know that because I was the one who approved the catering order 3 weeks earlier, wired the deposit from an account my son didn't know existed, and said nothing when my daughter-in-law told her mother I was just tagging along to the venue walkthrough. I didn't correct her. I never do. My name is Franklin. I am 63 years old. I have calluses on my hands from 30 years of working job sites before I ever sat behind a desk, and I own 4 of them now. Job sites, I mean, though desk is probably the more accurate word for what I do these days. My company builds commercial properties, hotels, medical centers, mixed-use developments along the coast. Nothing flashy. I don't need flashy. I wear the same canvas jacket I've worn since 2009, and I drive a pickup truck that has a dent above the rear left wheel, well, that I keep meaning to fix. My son is 31. His name is Owen. His wife's name is Stacy. I want to be fair to her when I tell this. I want to be honest about what happened and why, and I want you to understand something before I get to the part where she took the microphone at the rehearsal dinner and introduced me to her family as, and I'm using her exact words here, the old handyman we've been dealing with. They laughed. All of them. Her mother covered her mouth with a cocktail napkin, and her father, a man named Vic, who smells like synthetic cedar and has never once looked me in the eye, he laughed the loudest. I stood there at the edge of the room in my canvas jacket, and I smiled. I want you to understand why. Owen's mother left when he was 4. That's not a sad part of the story. It's just a fact. She left, I raised him, and I made a decision early on that my son would never feel the weight of what I was building. Not because I was ashamed of it, because I'd seen too many men use their money like a leash. I'd watched fathers hand their kids everything, and then act confused when those kids never learned to stand up straight. I didn't want that for Owen. I wanted him to know what it felt like to work for something and have it mean something. So I kept things simple at home. Modest house. Public school. Second-hand furniture that I fixed myself when it broke, which taught him to fix things too. He knew I worked in construction. He knew I was comfortable. That was all I let him see. When Owen turned 25, I told him I had some investments. Not details, just I have some investments, and one day they'll matter to you. But right now what matters is that you stand on your own feet. He accepted that. Owen is a good kid fundamentally. He has a good heart. The problem is that his heart is not the one running things in his marriage. He met Stacy 4 years ago at a work event. She came from what I'll call comfortable money. Her father's family had commercial real estate going back 2 generations in the Carolinas, not serious money. Enough money to build a personality around, enough that Stacy grew up understanding the world in terms of who had it and who didn't, and she learned early how to read a room for that information. She read me wrong. I'll admit that was partly my fault. The first time Owen brought her home, I was in the backyard replacing a section of fence. I had sawdust on my shirt and a smear of wood stain across my forearm, and I shook her hand and offered her sweet tea. She was polite enough that day. Distant, but polite. The second time we met, I was picking Owen up from their apartment in the truck because his car was in the shop. She saw the truck. She saw the dent. She saw the canvas jacket. After that, something settled in her eyes when she looked at me. A kind of ease. Like she'd done her calculation and filed me away. I noticed it. I chose not to address it. Vic was the first one to say something outright. This was maybe 8 months before the wedding, at a dinner they organized at a restaurant I own a minority stake in. Though I kept that information to myself, Vic was talking about property values in the neighborhood where Owen and Stacy were looking at houses, and he said, not quietly, that he hoped someone was going to step up and help with the down payment. Because, and he glanced at me when he said this, not everyone at this table has the means to contribute meaningfully. Owen didn't say anything. I want you to sit with that for a second. My son sat at that table and said nothing. I cut my steak and I said, that's a fair point, Vic, and I changed the subject. That night, I drove home and sat in my kitchen for a long time. I thought about calling Owen. I thought about a lot of things. What I finally decided was that I would watch and wait, because sometimes a man needs to see the whole picture before he knows where to hang it. The engagement was announced the following spring. Stacy's parents wanted a large wedding. Owen called me to ask if I could chip in for some of the costs, which told me everything I needed to know about what Stacy had told him, about what I was capable of. I said I'd be happy to help however I could. I asked him to send me the budget. The budget was $240,000. I wired the full amount from a personal account and told Owen it was everything I had saved and that I hoped he appreciated the sacrifice. I said that last part to see how he'd respond. He said, "Thanks, Dad. Stacy says the venue requires the deposit by Friday." No pause, no pushback, just the deposit is due Friday. That was when I understood that whatever was wrong wasn't only coming from Stacy's direction. Something had shifted in my son. He'd been living inside her family's framework long enough that he'd started to see me the way they saw me, not as his father. As a resource, a slow, modest, slightly embarrassing resource who smelled like sawdust and drove a dented truck. I paid the deposit. I paid all of it. And I decided I was going to attend my son's wedding in my canvas jacket because I needed to see exactly how far this had gone. The rehearsal dinner was at a private club in the city. Nice place. High ceilings, dark wood paneling, the kind of room that makes people feel important. I arrived alone. I had been to this club before. As it happens, the general manager and I have lunch here twice a year, but I walked in through the main entrance like any other guest, and nobody behind the desk recognized me because I'd never given them a reason to connect the man in a canvas jacket to the name on certain financial documents. I found my place at a side table, not the family table. A side table near the window, next to a cousin of Stacy's I'd never met who spent most of the evening on his phone. Stacy's mother came over once to say hello. She called me Franklin the Builder, which is not how you introduce yourself when you're trying to make someone feel welcome. It's how you classify them. She asked if the drive had been long and whether I'd had trouble parking. The way you ask someone who you assume came in a vehicle that requires apologizing for. I said the drive was fine. I said parking was easy. I smiled. Then came the toasts. Stacy's father went first. He talked about legacy and family and what it meant to watch his daughter find a man worthy of the Caldwell name, which is their name, not Owen's. He talked about their beach house and their family traditions, and he mentioned, twice, that the Caldwells do not do things halfway. The room applauded. Owen was beaming. Then Stacy took the microphone. She started warmly enough. She thanked her parents. She said she loved Owen. She made a joke about the seating chart that got a laugh. Then she turned toward the room and said she wanted to introduce some of the people who made this evening possible. She went through her family one by one, assigning each of them a title and a credential. Her aunt was a federal judge. Her cousin had just made partner at a firm in New York. Her uncle had founded something. Everyone was something. Then she pointed at me. "And over by the window," she said, and she was smiling. It was a particular kind of smile, the kind that is performing generosity while delivering something else entirely. "That's Owen's dad. He's been a real trooper helping with logistics, running errands. You know how it is. We really couldn't have managed without our handyman." The room laughed. Her father laughed. Her mother did the cocktail napkin thing. Owen, my son, looked at the tablecloth. I did not stand up. I did not change my expression. I picked up my water glass and I took a slow sip and I thought, all right, now I know. The wedding was 2 days later. Same canvas jacket. I know people wondered. I heard a comment from one of the groomsmen. Something about whether I'd at least ironed it. I hadn't. I sat in the third row, on the groom's side, and I watched my son get married, and I felt something complicated in my chest that I won't pretend was simple. He looked happy. That's the hard part. Owen looked genuinely happy standing up there, and I had to hold both things at once. The love I have for him, which is real and enormous and has not shrunk by 1 inch, and the thing I'd watched him become in the years since he met Stacy, which was smaller than he used to be. Less himself. Dick found me at the reception. This surprised me because Vic had never sought me out before. He came over with the swagger of a man who has just successfully married off a daughter to someone else's family's money, which is the specific kind of swagger that only money-adjacent people carry, as opposed to people who actually have it. He said he was glad I'd made it. He said it the way you tell someone you're glad the plumber showed up on time. Then he said, and I want to be precise here, "You know, Franklin, it means a lot that you've been so supportive. Stacy's a little worried about the financial transition for Owen going forward. Now that you've put in your contribution, they'll obviously need to build stability on their own." He was telling me that my usefulness was over. I nodded. I said, "I appreciate you saying that, Vic." He started to walk away. I said, "Actually, before you go, how's the Harwell development treating you?" He stopped. The Harwell development is a 60-unit mixed-use project in coastal South Carolina that had been stalled for 14 months due to a financing dispute. Vic's family had a significant equity stake in it. The whole thing had been frozen while they searched for a lead investor willing to step in and restructure the deal. I knew this because I was the lead investor. I had known for 6 weeks. My attorney had finalized the paperwork 11 days before the wedding. I hadn't said anything because I was waiting to understand the full picture before I decided how to hang it. Vic turned around slowly. He looked at me. I watched the information travel across his face in stages. First confusion, then recognition. Then something that looked like a man trying to decide very quickly whether to run or to smile. He smiled. It was not a good smile. He said, "Franklin, I'm sorry. What was your last name again?" "Greer," I said. "Franklin Greer. I believe you've been corresponding with my attorney, a Ms. Whelan, regarding the Harwell restructure." The color left his face in a way that reminded me of those time-lapse videos of flowers closing at night. He said, You're the Greer Capital Group?" "It's just my name," I said. "I don't need it to be a group. I want to be clear about what happened next, because I've told this story to a few people, and some of them want me to say I confronted Stacy, or that I made some kind of scene, or that I stood up in the middle of the reception and delivered a speech. I didn't do any of that. It's not how I operate. What I did was finish my dinner. I danced with nobody because I didn't feel like dancing. I said goodbye to Owen, who hugged me and said he loved me and seemed, in that moment, entirely himself again. And I held on to that because I needed it. Then I drove home in my truck, and I sat in my kitchen again. And I made a decision. I called my attorney the following Monday. I told her to proceed with the Harwell restructure under my standard terms, which are not unkind but are precise, and which would require Vic's family to dilute their equity position by roughly 40% in exchange for the liquidity they needed. They had no alternative. The deal they'd been trying to close for over a year had fallen through twice. I was the only realistic option left. Vic called me the next day. He was no longer the man who smelled like synthetic cedar and laughed at rehearsal dinners. He was a man with a problem and a phone. He started by saying he hoped there were no hard feelings. I said I didn't have any hard feelings. He said he hoped we could do business in a way that respected both families. I said I appreciated that. He said Stacy had mentioned he'd had no idea. He wished he had known sooner. Things might have been different. He wanted me to know that his daughter had nothing but respect for me. I let him finish. Then I said, "Vic, I'm going to be straightforward with you. The terms of the Harwell restructure are what they are. My attorney will send the final documents this week. You should review them with your legal counsel. I don't mix business with family sentiment, which means the terms won't change because of who our children married, and they won't get worse because of what was said at a rehearsal dinner. It's business. You have until the end of the month." He said, Yes, of course, thank you, Franklin." I said, "Have a good afternoon." I hung up and I sat there for a minute and I thought about my son. Owen called 3 weeks after the wedding. Not about Harwell. I don't think Vic had told him yet. He called because Stacy had found out about the financial accounts. My attorney had needed Owen's signature on a document related to the trust I'd been building for him since he was 12. And the number on that document was large enough that Owen called me from his car, from a parking lot somewhere, with something in his voice I hadn't heard since he was a teenager. He said, "Dad, what is this?" I said, "It's a trust. I set it up a long time ago." He said, Dad, this is." He couldn't finish the sentence. I said, "Owen, I want to tell you something, and I need you to really hear it. I didn't hide this to embarrass you or to make a point. I hid it because I wanted to know who you were when you thought I had nothing. I needed to know that you weren't going to be a man who only stood up for his father when it was in his interest. Silence. I said, at the rehearsal dinner, I needed you to say something. When your wife called me a handyman in front of her family and needed my son to correct her. You didn't. And that hurt me more than anything she said. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I know. Just that. I know. We talked for 2 more hours. I won't put all of it here because some of it was between a father and a son, and it belongs to us. What I will say is that Owen is not a bad man. He got lost for a while inside something that was louder than him. That happens. It happened to me once, a long time ago, in a different context. The question is whether a man can find his way back to himself. I think he can. I think he is. Stacy called me the following week. This surprised me more than Vic had. She asked if she could take me to lunch, and I said yes, and we met at a diner near my office, because I suggested it and she agreed without arguing, which told me something had shifted. She looked different across the table. Not smaller, exactly, more real, like a person instead of a performance. She said she didn't know where to start. I said she could start anywhere she wanted. She said she'd grown up understanding that how you presented yourself was the same as who you were, that her parents had taught her, directly and indirectly, that a man in a canvas jacket and a dented truck was a particular kind of man, and that a wedding was a place where that kind of man sat at a side table. She said, I made assumptions, and I was cruel about it. I said, you were. She looked like she expected me to soften it. I didn't. She said, is there anything I can do? I said, yes. Be honest with my son. Don't manage him. Don't make decisions about what he's allowed to know about his own family. Treat him like a partner. She nodded slowly. I said, and call me Franklin. Not Owen's dad, not the builder. Franklin. She said, okay, Franklin. We finished lunch. I paid the check. She didn't argue about that either. The Harwell deal closed in October. Vic's family took the terms. I didn't gloat about it. Not to anyone. I don't have the appetite for gloating. What I have is the knowledge that I walked into my son's wedding in a canvas jacket and a dented truck, and I sat at a side table by the window, and I let a room full of people decide who I was based on what they could see. And not one of them got it right. Not because I was hiding something. I want to be clear about that. Because money is just money. It is not character. It is not history. It is not the measure of whether a man deserves to sit at the family table. I know who I am. I built it from the ground up. The same way I build everything. I don't need anyone else to know it. I just need my son to remember it. And I believe he does. I've been thinking about that diner lunch with Stacy. The way she sat across from me and said she didn't know where to start. I've replayed it more times than I expected to. Not because I'm proud of how things unfolded, but because that moment told me something I needed to hear. That people can reckon with themselves when the ground shifts under them. It doesn't always happen. But sometimes it does. What happened in the story wasn't luck. I want to be honest about that. The Harwell deal didn't fall into my lap the week before the wedding by accident. I'd spent 30 years making decisions, quiet ones, unglamorous ones, the kind that don't get announced at rehearsal dinners, every time I chose to fix the fence myself instead of hiring it out. Every time I drove the truck with the dent instead of replacing it because the truck still ran fine. Every time I wired money and said nothing about where it came from. Those choices compounded. That's how it actually works. Not a single dramatic moment, but 1,000 small ones that nobody sees. Vic saw a man in a canvas jacket and made a calculation. What he didn't know was that the calculation required information he didn't have. That's the thing about judging people by surface. You are always working with incomplete data, and the world has a way of presenting you with the rest of it eventually, usually at the worst possible time for you, if you've been operating in bad faith. I don't call that karma in any mystical sense. I call it consequence. Actions have weight. How you treat people when you believe they can't help you or hurt you. That is the truest measure of your character, and that character shapes every room you walk into, every deal that does or doesn't close, every relationship that holds or breaks under pressure. Bitch's family had been coasting on surface and credential for so long that they'd stop doing the harder work of actually seeing people. That kind of blindness is expensive. They found out how expensive. Owen is the one I think about most. My son had the information he needed at that rehearsal dinner. He knew who his father was, not the financial details, but the substance of me. He knew what I'd sacrificed and what I'd built and what kind of man I tried to be. And he looked at the tablecloth. That cost him something. It cost us both something. The kind of clarity and steadiness of mind that lets a person stand up in a difficult moment. That isn't something you find when you need it. It's something you build ahead of time. The way you build anything worth having. Slowly, without applause, through repeated choices to do the harder right thing instead of the easier quiet thing. I'm not telling the story to make myself look good. I made mistakes raising Owen. I kept too much from him for too long, and the distance that created left room for other people's voices to fill the space where mine should have been. That's on me. What I know now is that the most important thing I can give him going forward is not money and not protection. It's the example of a man who knows who he is and doesn't need a room full of people to confirm it. I still drive the truck. The dent is still there. I keep meaning to fix it, but every time I walk past it, I think, not yet.